Adrenaline has two purposes. One is in the moment, you feel that adrenaline rush and you're bigger, stronger, faster. You're just capable of more. Adrenaline is like superhuman fuel. But there's another thing it does. Because that moment is so impactful, your brain doesn't know what's going on. It just knows how you feel. It wants to remember so that you avoid getting into that scenario again. Adrenaline creates an imprint. It creates memories.
Our next guest, Kashif Khan, is the founder and CEO of the DNA company and is here to share with us exactly how DNA testing can have an immense impact on your health, your wellness, and your happiness. Kash is the author of the best-selling book, The DNA Way. He is a celebrity longevity coach. Kash is also the creator and host of the DNA Talks podcast.
And I can tell you, when it comes to the rare genes, the hardcore genetics of disease, the number one contributor to the expression that turns on disease-causing genes is...
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Welcome to the next episode of the Live Beyond the Norms Health and Longevity podcast. What if the reason your diet isn't working, your sleep is off, and your supplements aren't helping is because your DNA says your current protocols will never work? What if DNA testing could help you understand what will never work and actually point you to the diet, supplements, and exercise routine that will optimize your health and longevity? Our next guest, Kashif Khan, is the founder and CEO of the DNA company and is here to share with us exactly how DNA testing can have an immense impact on your health, your wellness, and your happiness. I saw Kashif, we'll call him Kash because that's the name he's used to, speak at the Ultimate Wellness Conference in Miami, so I'm looking forward to this conversation and getting to know him better. A little bit about Kash. Kash is the author of the best-selling book, The DNA Way. He is a celebrity longevity coach. In fact, Dave Asprey wrote the foreword for his book. Kash has always been an entrepreneur and ultimately dove headfirst into DNA technology as he was dealing with his own health challenges. Kash is also the creator and host of the DNA Talks podcast. He is here today to let us know that chronic disease and the pace at which we age is optional. Kash, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Good to be here, man.
All right, before we jump into your area of expertise, I want to go further back. I want to go much further back. What was it like growing up little Kash? And then maybe even throw in how you found out your name was Kashif. Where did you grow up? What were your parents like? And if there was some event or someone you could pinpoint as the reason you would ultimately become a DNA expert, an entrepreneur, a best-selling author, what or who would that be?
So, yeah, my dad was fairly sick when I was growing up. That was the big deal that sort of molded our childhood, meaning we were broke, he didn't work, it was very stressful. And that drive of needing to always be working on stuff. My dad died when I was 17 and I ended up taking care of my mom and my sister. That was the big thing that, meanwhile I got this scholarship to this engineering thing and I had to go pay the bills, right? And I started working like an animal, not knowing how hard I was working. And then a few years later, I was like, I have employees. Where did this come from? Right. And so it just in the days, so that was a big, but during that time when my dad was sick, I would explore with him. He would go to Chinese herbalists and we would go to naturopaths and he couldn't afford the stuff. He was just learning about it. Right. And we would watch videos from the library about different medicines. We'd read books. So he opened my eyes to your body just needs homeostasis. It doesn't need a pill for a disease. So I learned that early, and when he died, that set me off on, well, why? What could have been different, And then in my 30s, I started to get sick. And when I started to get sick, I was like, I'm not going to go down the same path, and I'm going to finish the work that he taught me and figure out what's actually going on in my body.
And where did you grow up?
Oh, in Vancouver on the West Coast. And so it was technically a rainforest. It rains all day long, and that culture was also very conducive to exploration, connection. I would also say being in that city at that time, it's different now, but it was like living on a campsite. That's what it felt like growing up.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So you kind of step up as the provider. One way to do that is to get a job. I'm guessing why entrepreneurship, right? Because it's a hard path, and maybe it sounded
Yeah.
like you didn't even realize how hard of a path it was that you jumped into. And talk about some of your initial businesses, and then we'll start getting into the story of how you started the
Yeah.
DNA company.
So I couldn't get a job. I applied everywhere, and all my friends had jobs, right? And at that time, it wasn't difficult. Every kid had a summer job. You just apply at the local fast food place and you get a job. I couldn't, nobody would even call me back. And so I was forced down this path of entrepreneurialism. And I actually, when I look at my unique genetics, I'm actually designed to be an entrepreneur. When you study my brain, and that's probably why what I would submit, what I wrote in my resume, whatever, was not conducive to someone that you should hire. It was pretty clear, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, my genetic wiring is literally designed for entrepreneurs. It's what we call warrior genetics, reward-seeking behavior. You know, my dopamine levels are not ideal, and so I seek more and I take risks, and that's why I said, okay, I'm going to start buying and selling stuff and paying the bills. And lo and behold, a couple months, well, not a couple months, but 6 months later, I bought my mom a house, right? And
Wow.
it's like, where did this come from? I just kept going and going and going. So, yeah, it's
What were
literally
you
my
buying and selling at that time?
whatever I could. So I actually was, there was a real estate boom in Vancouver, and I thought, how can I create value in this industry that I see right in front of me? So I started getting antiquities and things that had sort of a gray area in terms of value, and I was working with interior designers, and here's this like 18-year-old kid, 17-year-old kid going to an architectural design firm saying, you know that door you're about to build, how about this door that I just imported from Indonesia that's going to totally wow people as they walk in, and it worked. you know and so
Wow.
there's literally hotels and buildings in Vancouver that were built partially designed by me when I was
Wow.
17. Yeah.
That's really cool. Right. So
Yeah, it's pretty
you
crazy.
just kind of pulled up the bootstraps and knocked
Yeah.
on the doors that you needed to. And so was that purely out of necessity, or was there kind of anything in your family? I know before we started, you mentioned your uncle. Was there anything in your family that kind of drove entrepreneurship, and or is it your genetics actually?
Yeah, I saw it around me. My dad was very ill, so he couldn't work. So I saw him buying and selling cars, and then I saw him constantly failing at stuff because he would get sick and it would have to stop. And so I saw this activity, and I had another uncle, like I mentioned earlier, who was pretty entrepreneurial. And I just went to events and stuff and figured what can I actually work on now, right?
Mm.
And really what drove it is I didn't even have the money to buy stuff, so I had to figure who would actually give me something to sell that I could make money off of, and that started with design.
Wow. Necessity is the mother of invention,
Yeah.
right? That's pretty awesome. All right, so you're entrepreneurial. I think from your CV, you've different businesses here and there. How do you land with the DNA company? I know it's some of it is your health journey.
Yeah. So I built that business. I exited it. I ended up building what I really enjoyed doing was the marketing side of things. So taking an idea and turning it into something valuable. And so I
Mm.
realized if this is what I'm good at, I should do it for other people. And so I built a public relations and marketing company in Toronto where I now live. And within a year, we were the number one company in the city, right? We were working from mom and pop shop all the way up to like Royal Bank, Canada's largest company with 40,000 employees and things of that nature, right? And so I really loved what I was doing. And in that journey, I got sick. And I'd never been sick before, never needed a doctor. At the age of 38, well, it started at 36. I had eczema so bad that I couldn't even open my left eye. It was like inflamed and sealed shut. I had psoriasis all over my body. I had gut issues, migraines, depression, didn't want to get out of bed, reflux, all sorts of stuff going on. And so, just like anyone else, I went to the doctor and said, please tell me how to fix this. And I ended up having five different doctors giving me five different pills. And I had a simple question is, what did I do? Like, this can't be a coincidence that all these things just happened. What did I change? What did I do? And I couldn't get that answer. And in my problem solving brain, I started to seek the answer myself. That reminded me of my dad. And I started going to traditional Chinese medicine, to naturopathy, homeopathy, functional medicine, eventually landed on genetics. And I learned that even though me and my business partner, so I believe the doctors because me and my business partner, we were the same age, we lived on the same street, we ate the same food, we ate lunch together every day, we drove to work, we worked out of the same office. My life was spent with him. right? Versus my family. Most of my time was with him. And he wasn't sick. So it made sense that you have these things. Then when I dug into my unique genetics, there was a couple of eureka aha moments. And I'll tell you two of them right now. One of them, there's a gene pathway for how your body utilizes glutathione, this antioxidant that we all need to sort of neutralize and remove toxins in simple terms. This gene pathway has several genes that instruct it in various parts of your body. And there's a gene called GSTM1, which drives glutathione activity in your gut. And there's a phenomenon called a copy number variation. So we think of genes as variants, mutations, or what version of the gene do I have, right? There's something called a copy number variation where you literally don't even have the gene. And that's what was happening for me. This gene, GSTM1, happens to be one of the most important genes you could have, is also one of the few that's possible to be missing. And it's missing. If DNA is an instruction manual for your cellular biology, it's like there's a couple pages missing from mine, right? So now this instruction doesn't exist. So when me and my business partner were going to lunch every day, and the glyphosates and the toxins and the drying agents and the plastics and all this stuff that were on this outside commercial food, which by the way, I never used to eat outside of my home up until I started working with my business partner, right? I grew up poor, so I ate at home, right? I didn't know what a restaurant was. And then I started eating lunch out every day. It felt good, but it made me sick. And we were also eating very clean food. We were eating this Mediterranean, Lebanese type food, but there's drying agents for certain grains, there's glyphosates, etc. So anyways, my gut couldn't detoxify those things. I ended up with a dysbiotic leaky gut, which led to inflammation, the eczema, led to leaky brain, the depression, all this stuff, right? Then that forced me to dig deeper and see, well, what else can I figure out from this genetics? And I can tell you that when I met with the geneticist, I didn't learn anything. They're like, oh, you don't have any risk for anything, good luck. But when I started to dig in and say, what does this gene do? What does this gene do? And started to ask the right questions from a layman's perspective, then I started to get insights. Data is dumb. You need to know what questions to ask, right, to get insights. So the second thing that was an aha moment was my dopamine pathway, which I brought up earlier. When you experience satisfaction, whether through pleasure or through reward, both are a hit of dopamine. I enjoy something or I achieve something. They both give you a dopamine hit. There are receptors in your brain that allow you to actually bind and experience that dopamine. There's a gene called DRD2 that determines the density of those dopamine receptors. After you're done with the euphoria, then there's a removal. The dopamine gets broken down, and there's a protein that clears that broken down metabolite. So if you look at the way my brain does that, my DRD2 gene is the worst possible, so the density of receptors is slim to none. The MAO, which breaks down the dopamine, is the fastest possible, so it starts being broken down before it's even finished. And the protein is also the fastest possible. So I feel it way down here, and it's gone in an instant. So I'm wired for depression, right? I'm wired for can't get no satisfaction. I'm wired for the world sucks. But I'm also wired for, if I use this for pleasure, it's depression or addiction. If I use this for reward, it is achievement. What was meant to be a superpower of reward-seeking behavior, what we call reward warrior genetics, which was meant to me lead the tribe and pull everyone forward, could also be my kryptonite if I wasn't in the right context. Right? And so, but now why did this hurt me? I was running 10 different companies and I was completely burnt out and my nervous system was destroyed. And when you're in fight or flight, go do whatever you want on supplements and foods, they don't work because your body doesn't want to recover, right? So my brain was so capable of taking on challenge because of my low dopamine levels and needing it that my body couldn't keep up. And I was completely toasted and fried. I didn't know. And so now I structure and I have people around me to sort of naysay and mitigate, right? And so now I know that
don't start that fifth business.
Yeah. And now I actually get more sense of reward in saying no to what feels like a distraction and what yes used to be, let me say yes to the shiny object. Right? They both are rewarding. They're both rewarding. Now I know I get my satisfaction from saying no, and it actually does give me satisfaction.
So one of the things that, as you're describing this story, right, you're talking about digging in deep into genetic information. much easier today, right? Like you can go to ChatGPT and you can say, hey, where were your sources of information? Again, I'm sure you were just resourceful as all get out, right? Knocking on the right doors, but where were you going to understand your GSTM1 and your DRD2? Like what was your kind of information resource?
So this is going to sound crazy, but when I learned that there's a way to understand unique bio-individual information and get the right answer for you, then my mom, who was arthritic and couldn't get out of bed, within months I had her going to a gym and training and working out. My niece that couldn't go to school because of anxiety, I had her sort of good and going to school. My friend who was on cholesterol pills got off of the cholesterol pills. I realized, like, wow, I have something very important here. And it was like a sense of purpose that I didn't experience before, right? And so I took my business partner and I said, you keep the business, in fairness to you. We built this thing together, you keep it. I found what I got to work on. I don't know what it's going to turn into. I just know this is why I'm here. I got to work on it. So I literally hired PhDs, functional medicine doctors, naturopaths that sat at my dining room table for 6 months. So every single day we sat, I didn't even know what we were doing or why we were doing it. I just know that this was so important that I had to do it. And so we literally sat at my dining room table, and there was like whiteboards and charts all around my dining room wall, just mapping out all these genes. So I would talk to them about what do you know, but they didn't know how to apply it. Right? It had to be
Right.
who's the labor. Like if the tool isn't designed for me, the guy that doesn't know anything, it's not going to work. That's been the challenge with this level of knowledge. It's always been the ivory tower is the conduit to the truth, but then that ivory tower designs the tool for themselves. Right? They don't design it it should be as easy as tell me what's wrong and how to fix it. That's it. And so I was filtering all this knowledge through my need of how I needed it built to the point where I learned it. And then I started teaching them, right? I started teaching them that this gene you just told me about, I understand what you said it does, but what about if you were a soccer player? Or what if you were, eating a high-fat diet? Doesn't that change the outcome? And then we started overlaying environment, nutrition, and lifestyle on top of the genes. And that's the perfect triangulation, which is your DNA sits in the middle of environment, nutrition, and lifestyle. And there's this whole debate over, do genetics matter? No, because if a gene's not expressing, it doesn't matter. Do epigenetics matter? No, because if you don't have the gene, it doesn't matter what you do, right? They both need to be combined, right? Which is your habits plus your genetics equal the net result. That's what I built. It's called functional genomics, right? And that was just the practical answer that was required. And
Yeah.
so the answer, yeah.
I love that description because it is classic entrepreneurship, the warrior genes, the leader, which is I lean on experts, right? And we often as entrepreneurs have to lean on experts. And ultimately experts tend to get so focused on what they do that they can't get out of their own way to make good decisions, right? They just provide the information and you just kind of went in and culled that. So talk about, you've got this think tank, right? You're coming up with all these ideas. You're actually delivering value to your family members. When does that say, okay, now it's the DNA company, and talk maybe about some of the challenges in the early days?
We got to a point where I was partnering with a bunch of clinics and we were changing lives, and it was very hands-on. We were working with a lot of pro athletes in Toronto. There's a lot of NHL hockey training that happens here. So I was working with a lot of NHL players. Started working in Hollywood. Remember, that time it was still very expensive. The technology was expensive, right? So we were working, there's a personal trainer that did a lot of the Marvel movies. So we were working on like Marvel movie sets and optimizing these guys. And we were working on Navy SEALs, Olympic athletes, the people that cared about this stuff. Then it got to like breast cancer clinics, infertility clinics, prostate cancer type. It started dwindling down into like everybody had access, right? And from that, I spent the next 3 years, I realized what was missing was there's all these geneticists sitting in front of me that understand genetics, and these functional medicine doctors in front of me that understand biology, but these two things weren't put together. So I said the research that's missing is application. And so we spent the next 3 years studying 7,000 people. We recruited 7,000 patients from various clinics and personal training labs and whatever, and we actually got every single person to the finish line. So he said that unless we can understand their environment, the supplements they're taking, what city they live in, their vitamin D levels, their stress levels, you have to input every single attribute that expresses their genes, right? And now you have the net results. We studied both. This woman has breast cancer. Why did she get it? Then we also studied this woman has the exact same bad DNA as this woman, but she didn't get the breast cancer. What did she do right? And if you don't answer both questions, you don't know the full story, right? And that's what I did for 3 years and tracked all these people and built this crazy algorithm that whiteboard on my wall just kept going from the dining room into the living room into the it became my wallpaper, right? And then eventually became digital. And now there's this crazy algorithm that interprets DNA from a functional perspective.
When you're interpreting DNA, I imagine you're not looking at the entire strand. You may be actually pulling it, right? Like getting the results from it, but you're honing in on probably a certain number of SNPs. What does that number look like?
Yeah. So there's like 22,000 genes. You can go get a whole genome sequence, but it's not going to change your life. There's only about 100 we look at. Actually, less than 100. It's 90. I think 96. I think what will give you biggest ROI on understanding your DNA is the day-to-day biology, which is I make hormones every day. I make neurochemicals in my brain every day. I metabolize food every day. I detoxify every day. These things are always happening. Looking for a rare marker for a rare cancer, is useful, but is also the anxiety that gets induced alone will probably cause it, right? So the daily biology. And I can tell you, when it comes to the rare genes that are the hardcore genetics of disease, the number one contributor to the expression that turns on disease-causing genes is negative emotion. So trauma, fear, stress, anxiety. The number one driver of turning on the good disease prevention genes and keeping the disease-causing genes off is positive emotion. So love, pleasure, joy, all the oxytocin, hugging the poop out of your dog, that kind of stuff, right? So positive, and if you just do even that one thing, you're putting at bay all these crazy disease-causing genes. But the functional stuff is where I like to play, because that's where you can tweak how you feel on a day-to-day basis.
It's interesting because so my dad had ALS, right? So I've got a story that's very relevant to this. My dad died with ALS. His grandmother had ALS, and what that typically means is familiar, like it's a genetic. And when we were meeting with my dad's ALS doctor, she was like, you have a 50% chance of having this gene. Doesn't mean you get ALS, but normally in the past, so this was in 2019, she said, normally I would say, don't bother getting tested because it just might induce anxiety and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Which is exactly what you're describing. But in 2019, she was like, you probably should get tested because there are genetic and new treatments that they're working on that you might be able to apply. So all of a sudden she shifted, and I would imagine it was within 2 years of that time frame. Everything that's happening in the genetic space is changing. And so now maybe it is of value because maybe you can participate in some study. And I think this leads into, you started the DNA company, I think in about 2018. What have you seen change? And what have you, so it's rapidly changing just like everything, but what have you seen that's changed that's impacted the DNA company?
So a lot has changed, and I'm going to use your ALS example as to open people's minds to what does functional thinking mean, right? What has changed, first of all, is I actually don't even run the company anymore. So as of 2 years ago, so I built the technology, partnered with the whole biohacking world. We got a bunch of great investors that funded the company. Like you said, Dave Asprey wrote the foreword for my book because he actually was one of our first investors that actually funded the research, because he was I actually just followed him around until he agreed to spit in a tube. I would go to conferences until he just got tired of me harassing him, and he did his testing. But when he then said, "This is incredible. I'd like to invest in your company," and he actually helped us get in front of all the right people. So there's that. But so then it got to the point where my mission and goal became bigger. It's like, okay, I have this sort of biohacking longevity tool. How do I integrate into the healthcare industry? Like, think about hospital, clinic, allopathic medicine. It's so far behind. I want to bring it in. And so I ended up partnering with a telemedicine company who already had their foot in the door in that side of the world. And now they took over, and they're taking all the tech that I built and getting it all FDA cleared and turning it into healthcare devices, et cetera. And they're just about there. They got a major clearance in September. So by the end of this year, it's going to be like more of a healthcare tool, right? And that was my goal, to get it to more people. So now, meanwhile, that ALS example you gave is a perfect example of genetics versus functional genomics. Genetics is you have a gene that equals ALS, good luck, right? You
Yep.
have a gene that all equals Alzheimer's, good luck. And why? What does that gene do? That's the thing that's missing. There's a big gap between this prescriptive answer versus a functional, well, what can I do about it? If you don't tell me what to do, what is this information? So there's a young lady here in Toronto where I live, and her family, I work with them as sort of a retainer, ongoing client. I just manage the health of their family, right? They just on call type of thing. So this one of the sisters has ALS. And their question was, their brother was getting married. She just wanted to be able to participate. She wanted to be able to walk around and dance. She's like, is there something you could do to like boost my muscle tone and give me more energy? So did a bunch of testing, looked at her genetics, and I came back and I said, I understand you've had this genetic test for ALS and you have this marker, but I don't think you have ALS. I think you have everything that looks like ALS. You have a genetic marker that points to it, but why weren't you born with it? If it's a genetic, why did it start in your late 40s, which was her case, right? Why not at 5 years old? And why don't we see that commonly? Why is it always later? Because something has to cause it, right? Yes, there's a genetic marker which equals a propensity. It's not a prescription, right? But why the propensity? If you don't understand the biology, then you don't know what to do about it. So what did I determine and why did I say I don't think you have ALS? There's a system in the body called glucuronidation, and it's one of the core detox pathways. And it's most commonly spoken of when it comes to hormone detox. So some men make excessive dihydrotestosterone, DHT, very potent form of testosterone. This helps get it out of the body to avoid prostate health issues, hair loss, other things, right? We've learned that whenever we see somebody with a mold issue, they always have missing glucuronidation genes. And so we've now learned that glucuronidation is what helps with biotoxins in your body. And this is not really spoken of at the academic level, right? So she was missing all these genes. And I said, I think you have a mold issue. Let's test you for mold. He said, what do you mean? I have ALS. I said, yes, but certain mold spores will cause cardiovascular disease. Some will cause hip pain. Some will cause cancer. Gliotoxin will go in your brain called nervous system issues. And some will cause neural inflammation that ends up looking like ALS, right? So we tested her home and we tested her body, crazy aflatoxin, gliotoxin, all sorts of stuff off the charts. She's like, well, even after all this, I still don't believe you. Why don't my husband and kids have this problem? They live in the same house. Because their glucuronidation was off the charts amazing. Her husband and her kids inherited the dad's glucuronidation. Doesn't mean the mold was good for him. It just means his ability to catch up and clear it was far superior to her. And now you have mold inflammation. Now you have the genetic propensities. Does she have bad neural tissue? Does she have bad cardiovascular tissue? Does he have bad? And then that's the disease that's going to trigger from the inflammation. Everything is rooted in inflammation, right? So now you can be much more functional and you aren't stuck with, I have ALS in my family, cross my fingers, right? Let's actually take action and see where would the inflammation come from that would trigger the gene expression. And it's not the same answer for everyone. That's how I use genetics.
Man, that's fantastic, right? So yeah, and that doesn't even talk about the future technologies, right? CRISPR related technologies or something. I think you mentioned that in one interview that I saw. Is that something that you're looking into? What's going on in that front? Because I think that's amazing.
Where we're at now is I think we've identified all the right targets. So if you name a disease, I can reverse engineer it the way I just talked about ALS, autism, you name it, right? So now that we know the right target, the CRISPR technology, gene editing already exists. The great experiment we just have of mRNA technology already exists, right? You can use technology for good or bad, depends whose hands it's in. So if we know we can signal to the DNA to mRNA to create the right outcome, we just need to know what to target. So if I say, okay, the number one killer is still cardiovascular disease. And if I look at cardiovascular disease and say, it's not a disease of the heart, it's a disease of the arteries. Calcification, plaque, cholesterolemia, this gunk preventing blood flow, and eventually the blood doesn't reach the heart and you have heart issues. So where does that come from? Well, there has to be inflammation. And if I were to take your artery, the inner lining, the endothelium, I can actually use your DNA to determine what quality of endothelium you have. Is it resilient or is it paper thin, highly prone to inflammation? And if it is paper thin, then that exact same mold that caused ALS in that girl would cause cardiovascular disease in someone else. So now I know that the contributing factor, the genetic factor, is the bad, what's called 9p21 gene that drives poor quality hardware. So if I can edit the 9p21 gene and now your instruction changes to make good cardiovascular hardware, you're not going to get cardiovascular disease. And so what I've been doing is identifying all the targets. And now we're partnering with the gene editing companies to say, you guys have this great technology, but you don't know what to focus on because everything academically is very symptom driven. It's not system driven. We know the system stuff. So yes, you're going to see Goldman Sachs says that by 2030, the genetic therapeutic industry is going to be a $4 trillion industry. The entire American healthcare system is a $4 trillion industry right now.
Wow.
Right?
What
Yeah.
a
So
statement.
because the power of I can turn something off, right? That's coming, right? And we know it's not going to be cheap, right? There are a couple of generic therapies that exist today. There's one that's like that the FDA approved for the eye, and it turns off this rare genetic condition. I think it's like a $50,000 treatment. Most insurance companies will cover it. It's rare. Then there's a biohacking treatment which activates what's called myostatin, follistatin, which is a muscle growth and fat burning pathway, and that costs $25,000, and you have to fly down to Ecuador to do it. It's not allowed in the U.S. So there's a research project in Ecuador that's doing it. It's actually funded by Peter Thiel, so he's the guy funding the research. So those are the only two that really work today, but the technology just needs to be layered onto more targets.
So talk about, so the eye, my understanding is one of the advantages of working on the eye is it's kind of a closed system. So
Yeah.
if you have any kind of genetic problems because you're making genetic modifications, they tend to stay enclosed. What does that look like? How would that kind of technology compare to, the mRNA vaccines, right? Like, is it similar technology? Is it CRISPR, which is very different? What does that look like?
Different, and that's the challenge. And you're absolutely right that isolating the eye makes it easier, because here's this thing. Okay, you invented this way. CRISPR is gene editing. You're actually taking a gene, cutting a section, replacing it, or removing it, binding it back together. How do you get all of your 50 trillion cells to adapt at the same time? So in the eye, you can do it, right? And this is why mRNA is a more likely, and there's ways to do it through proteins and other technology also, where it's not about editing the DNA, it's about editing the signals. The mRNA, which is more the signal, right? So likely you're going to see a lot more mRNA and a lot less gene editing. The gene editing you're going to see more in the rare genetic conditions. But the day-to-day stuff that we're talking about is probably going to be mRNA.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept of like, hey, you've got a genetic predisposition. You can edit that gene and effectively fix it. But how do you get that into your system and then get it to propagate throughout?
Yeah.
It sounds like, at least moving forward, you're pretty bullish on, is it bullish or bearish? I think it's bullish on mRNA. Like you're pretty positive about what mRNA might be able to do. What are your concerns in that space as well?
Yeah, concerns are people moving too quickly and not knowing what else you're fueling. Like, there's certain peptides even where we say if you have cancer, don't take them, right? Because you might be fueling this rapid cell development, including cancer cells. So there are some concerns over, and I've already seen this, companies moving too fast, right? And the science does tell us there's risk. So the good news is that all this is fixable, right? Because we already know where the problems come from. But for example, the major rollout we had, how many turbo cancer cases are there now, right? How many, like the world has changed because of a rollout of a tech that was, for whatever reason, was rolled out, so that's the risk. But the good news is the risk is all identifiable and addressable. It's not like a gray area where we don't know what's coming.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, is that our understanding of DNA, how DNA impacts us, it's constantly improving. Like they're coming up with new awarenesses. Is there, as this is evolving, are there any sequences that you thought a couple of years ago maybe did X and now we understand that they do Y? Like that's one interesting aspect. Is there anything that's kind of flipped? And then you said that you kind of focus on about 96. I would imagine that that's kind of increasing, maybe even quarter over quarter, given like DNA research that's going out.
It's increasing very slowly because the functional gene pathways, we already know what they are, right? We already know hormone metabolism. We already know like food metabolism. It's understanding more about each gene and what it does so we can better treat it, right? So there is a little bit of new genes. So an example of that is a common question I used to get was, is there a genetic pathway for chronotype, which is sleep hygiene? Some people are night owls, some people sleep early, and my answer was always no, there isn't. But now there is. We figured it out. There's actually a gene pathway that tells us who is better off sleeping late, sleeping early, waking up late. It's actually hardwired into your circadian rhythm, right? So that's something, an example of a gene that we didn't know was going to tell us something that we now know. Then there are examples of there's a gene we already work on, and the more we dig and study people, the more we see a trend, and then we prove that it does something else. So for example, there's a methylation gene that I only used to speak of in the context of how effectively it helps you make enzymes to break down plant foods. So if somebody wants to be a vegan, I'll look at this gene to tell them if they're actually going to thrive or not. So some people literally can't be vegan. They can't, the amino acids and proteins you need from plant foods, they can't extract. Some people can't break down kale and spinach and just the enzymes they need, they don't do a good job. Some people thrive as a vegan. They actually do really good because of this gene pathway. Now, what I also learned, this is a more recent learning, is our ancestors that thrived on plant foods didn't have a whole foods market to go to, right? They would farm, they would yield whatever that harvest is, and it was too much food to eat today, which means they had to store it. And the way you stored plant foods was you pickled and fermented them, which means they were probiotic rich. And now I've also learned that the same exact gene pathway that causes somebody to be a good enzyme producer for plant proteins causes them to be bad at managing the diversity of their gut microbiome bacteria. So when I have two people that take an antibiotic, one is back to normal in a month and one is screwed up for a year because of this gene pathway. They can't rebuild what they destroyed. So yes, we keep learning even more about individual genes. There's no gene that does one thing. They all have many purposes.
So when somebody comes in and gets your test done, do they get a report that's like, hey, vegan not good for you? Maybe carnivore is a little bit more, at least keto is a little bit more viable for you. What are some of the key pieces that come out of what are some key learnings that come out of taking your test?
So there's two different ways to approach this. The DNA company, the company that I no longer run, still sells the test, right? Which is you can go buy the test, read it. The reports will tell you a bunch of stuff like that. Like here's supplements, here's your detox pathways, here's your hormones. Then I would tell you that there's a bunch of stuff that I know that the FDA won't let me put in a report, right? Because the report is limited to whatever they believe to be true. So my work that I do is in the context of programs. So every single week I have a group of 50 to 100 people that I walk through a genetic program to dive way deeper than the reports. Now that's considered education, so I can say whatever I want. It's not a one-on-one individual. Yeah. So it's not prescriptive, right? And now the people in the room can not only learn how to heal themselves, but also heal other people because they've not only been told, here's the gene, but they've also been told what it does to interpret for other people, right? So that's what I do. So the DNA company still sells the test, but I run these group programs where sometimes it's a specialized like weight loss program or women's hormone program, but it's usually general. Let's just go through all the pathways from your brain and what career you're wired for and stress and anxiety to sleep to your hormones and whether your hormones are hurting you or helping you, whether you should take hormone replacement therapy. Some women, it will literally hurt them. To cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, kidney, liver, your detox pathways, and then metabolism and food, right? So I kind of cover all those big buckets. And if you do everything right in those buckets based on your DNA, you're going to be the best version of yourself. That's what optimal looks like, right?
And how long is that kind of coursework? What does that typically look like?
I usually spend 6 months with people. So it's because remember, this is your DNA is the only thing that doesn't change, right? Meaning of test your gut microbiome, test your blood work. It's a new report every time. This is permanent. So it's much better for you if I can teach you rather than tell you, because the genes aren't changing. So 5 years from now, there's new problems. Go check your DNA. You know what to do, as opposed to needing to go to the doctor again, right? So 6 months, where the first month is I need to get the DNA sequenced. That takes time, right? The next month is we have a series of master classes where we dive deep into the hormones, dive deep into all these aspects. Then it's like 4 months of Q&A and implementation. So people show up to calls and ask questions like, hey, I tried this supplement. It worked really good. What else can I do? Or, this report says to do this and the program told me this, but I have breast cancer. What do I need to think about, right? So those types of things we keep supporting for another 4 months or so. By the time people are done, they're like mini genetic wizards, right? So they now don't need my help anymore, which is the goal where I'm trying to get them to.
Very cool. One of the things that was pointed out to me by actually Dr. Sam Shea, I don't know if you know him,
Yeah.
and he tends to focus on genetic testing. And one of the things he pointed out was that the beauty of genetic testing is it's the least expensive test you'll ever do. Now, it may have an upfront cost, but because that test never changes over time, when you amortize it, it's the lowest cost test that you'll ever do. And the things that you learn from there are permanent. How do you feel? And maybe some of this comes out of your course, because I know Dr. Shea says sometimes your genes will say this particular diet is better, but your gut microbiome is not in the place to manage that particular diet. Do you bump into those types of things from time to time?
Yes. That's exactly why I'm saying hands-on work and coaching is super important. It's so complex. You need to, it's complex, but it's not, so I shouldn't say it's complex. It's simple, but it's a lot of information, right? So we need to consolidate all this stuff and consider environment, nutrition, and lifestyle. So I might say to somebody that, yes, you need microbiome support. Then I might also say that your gut detox genes don't work and you probably have a dysbiotic leaky gut. So that's not step one. And I'll tell you, for most people, it doesn't matter if it's a Hollywood celebrity, NBA basketball player, or a stay-at-home dad and mom. I always start with the nervous system. And most people don't know they need it, but almost everybody needs to work on their nervous system before they start working on other things. After we're done that, we then work on the gut. Let's get your gut into a better place. After we're done that, then we work on metabolic, like what are foods you're supposed to eat. But if you didn't fix the gut first, that didn't matter. Then we start working on the toxic burden, like what's going on in your body that you didn't even know. And based on your detox pathways, we kind of already know, right, what you're struggling with. Then we start to work on, let's fortify the suboptimal tissue that may lead to disease risk. And then finally, we wrap it all up with, let's optimize your hormones. And that's kind of the path we take people through. And there's very few people where that's not the right path, unless there's some red alarm emergency, right? That's usually where we need to go.
It sounds like the right journey that I keep hearing from all sorts of experts, right? Like this is, and you're taking into account DNA. Now, we'll change gears a little bit because not everyone out there is a Navy SEAL. I know you've done work with Navy SEALs. How did DNA help you when working with Navy SEALs? What can it tell us about kind of work ethic, I think, and maybe even resilience to suffering?
The question the reason I actually did the work with them was actually around trauma. So they were trying to figure out, why do these same soldiers, same exposure, same everything, some get PTSD and some don't? And so I showed them that when you are in a moment of impactful stimulus, you're deployed in battle, the bomb's going off, that is an adrenaline-inducing moment. And adrenaline, there's a gene called ADRA2B that regulates your adrenaline levels, but it also regulates the second function of adrenaline. So adrenaline has two purposes. One is in the moment, you feel that adrenaline rush and you're bigger, stronger, faster. You're just capable of more. Adrenaline is like superhuman fuel, right? But there's another thing it does. Adrenaline, because that moment is so impactful and your brain doesn't know what's going on, it just knows how you feel. It wants to remember so that you avoid getting into that scenario again.
Yep.
right? So adrenaline creates an imprint. It creates memories of not only the information, but also the feeling. And if your adrenaline genetics don't work so well, you surge adrenaline during that time and you imprint far too much emotion. And now the next time you recall that event, it's as if it's happening again. It's a continuation because you're feeling it like it's happening again because your brain remembers what things feel like in comparison to other people that some don't remember that. And so they are designed for deploying into active combat. This person isn't. There's a second layer to this, which is something called BDNF or brain-derived neurotropic factor. This is the primary fertilizer for what we call neurogenesis. So every time you learn something new, every time you believe a new concept, your brain gives you new neurology to process that. And BDNF is the main fertilizer that drives the new neural development. Now, if you have bad BDNF genetics, you don't do a good job of neuroplasticity, which means it takes you longer to process the impactful stuff, which means it has more of a shell shock effect. Whoa, overwhelming. Whoa, this means a lot. The person with good BDNF genetics is already working on it, doesn't give it much meaning or value, processing it. The person with bad BDNF genetics is like, this is heavy. This is a big deal. So now imagine those two traits. This is heavy, this is the big deal, and I remember what it feels like. That is a combination that equals PTSD and trauma in the wrong context. But in the right context, it equals emotional intelligence, it equals the wise person of the tribe, it equals the incredible salesperson that connects with everybody and knows how they feel. It was meant to be a superpower. Turns into a kryptonite, right? And now instead of trying to talk therapy your way through something you feel, we can actually work on the gene expression to turn it off. We know what turns it off. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so any chance the Navy SEALs are now doing kind of genetic testing and deciding who should be soldiers that get into it, or
yeah, so this was done through there's a group called the Liminal Collective, and it was run by a guy named Dr. Andy Walsh, and he was actually, I would say, one of the really first biohackers out there. His name just isn't known, right? So Logitech, the company that makes like the cameras for your computer, right?
Yeah.
Logitech has this human optimization division that nobody hears about. They spent, I think it was $1 billion plus on research around like everything human optimization because I don't know why that they wanted to go that direction. So they hired Dr. Andy Walsh to do this work, and that's how he got connected to the Navy SEALs because of this research, and he brought us in. So yes, still till today, they use these genetic insights for not only this, but many other things.
So this is a longevity podcast. What can our genes say about how long and how well we will live?
So there's a fountain of youth gene called FOXO3. And there's another one called FOXO4. So these two genes drive cellular senescence, cellular regeneration. There's another gene called P53 that's responsible for apoptosis and cellular death, right? So between these three, we can determine how effectively you regenerate and make new cells, how effectively you kill and destroy senescent cells, how effectively you power and energize your cells. And if you're doing well there, you're just going to age slower. Just naturally, you're just going to age slower. There's also genes around mitochondrial function and mitochondrial resilience, and to what degree are your mitochondria going to shrink and deplete and die off as you age versus stay resilient? To what degree can your body recover? So there's some people where genetically we tell them you should not be doing cardiovascular training. You don't run on treadmills, you don't do high intensity, you only do weight training. Because genetically they don't have great mitochondrial function, which means your mitochondria are constantly taking in the nutrition that you took in and the oxygen that you breathe and combining those to make energy. And in the process of using oxygen to make energy, you make something called an oxidant. And an oxidant is an inflammatory free radical. And if your genes don't clear that oxygen from the cell, it's like choking your cell, prematurely aging the cell. And so the exact habit of running on the treadmill that you think is going to add years to your life might actually take years away. Right?
So I got an interesting question, and maybe it's 2 or 3, but if you could have one gene edit that's safe and works, what would you go after? Maybe what would be the top 3 things that you would go after? Maybe personally, right? Because you might have some personal goals, and then maybe kind of from a population perspective.
So when I've done this many thousands of times now for different people, and I see the aging and chronic disease equation is very simple. It's a question of how much inflammation and how much cellular energy. When energy is up and inflammation is down, there's no disease. Thriving mitochondria, optimal cellular health, cell membranes are great, great energy production with low toxic burden, low inflammation. As soon as it looks like this, inflammation is high and energy is low, you're aging fast and you have chronic disease, right? So these are the two things I would pull on. And there is a master control switch that does this, and it's called the NRF2 gene pathway. So NRF2 is this control switch that regulates the gene expression of over 200 detox and antioxidant gene pathways. So if you can manipulate that gene pathway, you're turning on the volume and managing. And there is a tool, by the way, that does that, which is molecular hydrogen. And that's why of all the biohacks that are out there, in my patient population, the one thing that I recommend everybody does is hydrogen, right? And it actually regulates. There's also something called a redox molecule. There's different companies that make redox molecules that also manipulate the NRF2 gene pathway. There's a company called ASI, I think, that does it really well. So that's one that I would target. The other thing I would target, now this is not for me, I would say, where is 80% of Alzheimer's, 80% of autoimmunity, 80% of anxiety? It's in women, right? So the disease burden is much greater in women, and the recovery isn't there because the research doesn't apply to women. And I would say of all my years of researching, where women are stuck that is not being addressed medically is the toxic estrogen metabolites that cause chronic inflammation. So there's a gene pathway called CYP1B1. So if I can wave a magic wand and all women get a gene edit, it would be slowing down the CYP1B1 gene. So they make less toxic estrogen, especially considering you live in a hormone disrupting world today. Everything you touch and breathe and smell is an endocrine disruptor.
Very cool. So you're really looking for reducing inflammation, increasing energy. Is that one or two genes, or is that a set of like five genes?
Yeah, NRF2 gene does both, right?
Okay.
But if you were set, but that's not a functional pathway. That's harder to address. Hydrogen does it. But the genes that I would say are direct are superoxide dismutase, or SOD2, which is increasing energy, mitochondrial function. So everything around mitochondria, right? And the genes around reducing inflammation, I would say, are the glutathione pathway, primarily GSTT1 and GSTP1, those two genes, around the sort of the police force in your bloodstream looking for toxins to remove. So if you can even do work on those two, you've done incredible work on adding decades to your life.
Man, that's pretty cool. All right, well, this is a message to everyone hearing who has some ability to do CRISPR technology. Let's get those solved. So your book, The DNA Way, has 7 chapters on how DNA impacts mood, diet, sleep, cardiovascular health, hormones, inflammation, and longevity. How much research goes into kind of understanding each of those efforts? And I think this is kind of that war room that you had put together early on. And you'll probably be the same answer as last time. But which one of these kind of chapters would you focus on first for people?
Yeah, so you're right. It was the war room. It was those 3 years sitting at my dining table, and it was 7,000 people. Now, I would tell you the research we did, we have to think of this differently. It's not typical clinical research where it's like, we're not going to figure this out until we study 10,000 people. That's not the way we did it. We're like, every single person is a unique N of 1 study, right? So we only need to study one person to get the answer for that person. Now that answer, whenever we see in that same gene profile or pattern, it's the same, right? So 7,000 individual people to find 7,000 unique patterns that then we got to the point where we weren't learning anymore. We weren't seeing anything new. And we realized it was redundant. Now we had all the patterns mapped out, right? So it was about N of 1, right? What is my answer? I don't need you to research 10,000 people. I need you to research me and tell me how my genes work, right? And we did that enough times where there weren't any new profiles. It was all just repeating.
Okay. So that's where you honed in. And then kind of back, mood, sleep, diet, cardiovascular health, which one would you focus on?
So simplest is nervous system first, gut second, and detox burden third, right? Even if you do those 3 things, irrespective of whatever you're working on, if you do these 3, whatever you're working on already comes a much smaller version of itself. right? Whether you have fibromyalgia, endometriosis, migraines, whatever, if you work on these three things, which drives so much of everything, that thing is also already mostly fixed. Now it's just fine tuning.
I love that approach because Nervous, teaching a longevity fast track program. It's 8 weeks. And I chose week 1 to be mindset because mindset is so important. If you know you need to change your diet, your exercise routine, your focus on sleep, and you don't have the mindset to do it, like none of that's going to happen.
Yep.
So you really have to do focus on mindset. Which, with one caveat, which is somebody kind of pointed out to me, some people are they're just such a health dumpster fire that they can't even get their mindset right. Like their mind doesn't work properly. So sometimes you've got to do detox first. Sometimes you got to get the right nutrients in, etc. Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I'm going to give a place for you to share people how they can connect with you.
Sure.
Did I miss anything before we get into our wrap-up questions that you really wanted to maybe impress upon the
No, I
audience?
think this was an awesome conversation, exactly what people needed to know. I think it's just knowing that the pace at which you age and chronic disease, these are optional. We thought that they were innate. They're not, right? Like whether or not you have a chronic disease, they're caused. So there's a choice there. And how old you are on the inside versus what your birth certificate says, those are also optional, right? So just know that once you understand what causes things, now you can actually take control.
Excellent. All right. Well, here are our wrap-up questions. Cash,
Sure.
do you have a target age that you want to live to?
So I believe if you study the actual physical structure of the cell, what is aging? Aging is oxidation of DNA and the cellular integrity kind of unraveling, right? And we know that there's a protective bumper on the DNA called a telomere. And that telomere is designed to take the wear and tear to prevent the DNA from getting oxidized and damaged. That telomere is designed to last 120 years. So I think humans are supposed to live 120 years. And we're supposed to live to 120 with good health and die of old age. That's what I think.
And so how long do you want to live? And is it the same as how long you believe humans can live?
So yeah, my intention, first of all, I don't fear death. I believe there's something better coming, right? So I don't mind seeing the afterlife. But I do think that for me, my measure of gratitude and my measure of did I appreciate what I got is, did I return my body in the condition I got it in? Right? Did I actually maintain the gift I got? And so if I did, I should live to 120. Right? So I'm not trying to live forever. I just want to, the years that I have should be of high quality. And that to me is 120.
Excellent. What are 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts, to longevity and a long health span that you would share?
So let's say cheap and easy stuff. You need to start thinking about EMF I'm sure with your discussion, you probably brought that up before, but I would say that's a major contributor to where people are stuck. They're not realizing their headboard right up against the wall with their dirty electricity, their Wi-Fi, their neighbor's Wi-Fi, the 5G, which connects with your cell phone 15 times per second, right? 900 times per minute. It's unbelievable. So dealing with EMF mitigation through harmonizing frequency in your home, I would say the simple purge. Every fragrance, every candle, every cosmetic, every soap, every shampoo that has artificial fragrances, and getting those out of your house. The data shows that the indoor air quality is now 5 times worse than outdoor pollution in American homes because of the accumulation of all these toxic products. So just purge before you even start working on yourself. Stop causing the problem, right? And third, I would say that food is medicine, right? If it is what it was supposed to be, nutrient dense, grown in ancestral high quality soil. So you'd be shocked that if you actually source real stuff, how good it makes you feel. And this is before we get into the biohacks, before we get into your DNA, you're already doing this stuff. You already eat every day. You already are breathing in your house every day. You're already using products every day. Let's just clean that stuff up first.
Yeah.
Right. And even that will completely change your life.
Yeah, in my longevity fast track, we just said, hey, as this, you've been using this shampoo for years. You don't have to throw it away. Just finish it and then buy something that's fragrance free, right, and natural. Love that. What are 1 or 2 things you think people get absolutely wrong regarding longevity and a long health span?
I think moving too fast. I think, it's like hearing everything and wanting to do everything. And most people, the terrain is not ready. So you might hear like some biohacker say, "Hey, I just did this thing. It's incredible. Look how good. Look at my numbers on my thing, right?" But they've been doing it for 10 years and they don't have nervous system issues and their gut is in perfect shape and they don't have a toxic burden and their mitochondria is firing incredible. So not working on the terrain before jumping into the longevity tools. Get the terrain in check first, right? And also moving too quickly, right? It took you this many years to get here. Let's spend a little bit time unwinding it properly. And ideally, you need a 2-year plan. If you want to get to the best version of yourself, that's a 2-year job.
Yeah.
Right. If you're an adult. So because the toxic burden, the hormone regulation, the rebuilding of tissue, the repairing of cell membranes, upregulating of mitochondria, mitogenesis, making new mitochondria, all of these things need to be worked on in protocols, not all at the same time. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Cash, how can people contact you?
I would say Instagram is great if you want to go there and learn. I have a daily rant where I vent about something. So you can go check that out. Email, I can share my email with you guys. I would also say I can drop a link to our program if anyone wants to talk to like an intake coach, free phone call, you can talk to them. So I'll give you both. I'll give you an intake coach that can talk about that and then connect with me if you want.
Okay, so we'll get those links in. And what's your IG handle?
It's Kashif Khan Official. So KashKhan Official.
And what in the near future are you excited about?
Well, I'm right now what I'm working on is taking these beautiful peptides we all have access to and mapping them as per genetic need. And I've just finished doing that. And I'm now testing it with our own population and people are feeling incredible. So it's like we have all these signals. To me, health is signals. Your DNA is a signal. It's an instruction. Peptides are also signals. So I'm trying to combine them and put them together. I've literally just finished that. I've been working on it for about 6 or 7 months. And we're just getting ready to share it with the world.
Excellent. All right. So combining peptides, which I think we have a really good sense are really powerful with your specific DNA, that makes perfect sense. All right. Well, you can find him on IG. That's Kashif Khan Official. We'll have the email in the link in the show notes, and we'll have he's going to give links for program intake and direct access. Cash, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure, man. Good talking to you. This is awesome.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.